I was sitting in the theater. I thought, like, what the fuck am I watching this? But this is so cool. But like, how is this James Bond?
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yanis Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast. This is Rob. On this show, we democratize the film criticism conversation by bringing on fans and critics alike to talk about a movie of their choice, either something that they grew up with or something that they have a personal connection to. So in this episode, I'm pleased to welcome back to the show Adam Barnard. How's it going? Good to have you back.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about Bond this time. I feel like I'm always picking action movies, but I guess that's my niche.
From 2012 too, I think. Wasn't Looper also
the
2012 movie? Oh my God,
you're right.
Was that?
Yeah. And the third one, or the other thing I was going to pick besides Skyfall was Safety Not Guaranteed, which is also 2012. So I don't know. I think I was like, was I like 16 or 17 that year? I also went to the USC film school program that summer between like junior and senior years. So I was like, that was like such a memorable and seminal year in my life. And it also happened to have just a ton of good movies. Like Argo came out in 2012 as well. That's one of my favorites. Probably something I would also choose to discuss with you if given the opportunity. So like, I don't know. I guess it's kind of like a personal year for me in terms of movies.
Yeah, I was about to ask, is there something about 2012 that really spoke to you? So for people that haven't listened to our Looper episode, they should definitely go and do that, obviously. Tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do. Yeah,
so in terms of entertainment stuff, I do two things that are of note. One, I run a channel called Screen Fever with my writing partner, Jackson Smith, who I went to college with. Also my roommate as of like a month ago. So that's fun. And that's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, @Real Screen Fever. We've actually posted our short films on that channel, the stuff that Jackson and I have made because we went to film school, and we've produced a lot of narrative content as well as critique content like podcasts or video essays. So that's kind of like a creative outlet for us, not just a criticism outlet, not just like a production outlet. It's kind of just blending all our passions, and so we're trying to figure out how to evolve that. But I've also had you on that channel a couple times if you want to hear Rob discuss like a Kevin Smith or what else? You did the American Graffiti review.
Yeah, we need to do more of those, more of the older film, like the classic film reviews. I forgot what retro reviews.
Yeah,
we need to do more. Yeah, you guys need to get
retro
more
reviews. Yeah. We only have one up there, but I was actually thinking of doing like Moonraker. I think Jackson and I are going to do Moonraker, which is I'm going through a Bond phase right now. I guess I've started rewatching all of them in anticipation for the Bond movie next year because there's a lot I want to get an early start. That's just like where my head is at, and just life has been stressful lately, and Bond is such beautiful swashbuckling escapist entertainment that I've kind of just like I've gone through Marvel and Star Wars and so many phases with franchises, but this is something that has a storied 50-year history and something you can really watch evolve as a creative entity. And so whether it's the Sean Connery era or whether it's Daniel Craig's era wrapping up, I'm always interested in what the franchise has done, and I think that's part of the reason I really settled on picking a Bond movie for this discussion, because there's just so much culture and history around the franchise. It's really rich for great discussion.
That's a good preamble, actually, to talking about Skyfall itself. What is your history with the Bond franchise? Do you have any favorites? And I guess you already touched on why it speaks to you, why you keep going back to revisit it. But when did you first discover Bond, and at what stage? And how has that been formative in your cinematic education, I guess?
Right. I mean, unlike a lot of other movies or franchises from my childhood, I don't explicitly remember how I was introduced to James Bond. I think that my dad would record the TV edits for me because in a bit of a conservative household. So he grew up with Bond. He's on the older side. He's in his 60s now. So he was like a teenager when all the cool Sean Connery movies were coming out. And so I think he had a fond history of that and wanted to share it with me as much as he could at a young age, without getting into the too risque material. So I think I saw some of the Sean Connery or Roger Moore movies when I was really young. But I was still actually pretty young when Casino Royale came out. I mean, it was 2006. I was like 12 or 13, 11, 12, 13, somewhere around. Yeah, getting to the age where I forget my age, so that's fun. But I was still in a preteen, prepubescent phase when Casino Royale came out and revolutionized the James Bond franchise. So in a way, the Daniel Craig era was more seminal than like the Sean Connery movies. But as I've grown older, I've also been able to go back and see the value in the older movies. Because, when you're young, it's like, but Casino Royale had so much better action and explosions and fights. And like, but when you're older, you also appreciate the kind of more mellow, retro, suave vibe that the older movies had. So I just appreciate the franchise as a whole. Maybe I'll have to come on and discuss an old Bond movie with you sometime.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's funny because you were the exact same age that I was when GoldenEye came out, because that's the version of Bond that I guess I sort of grew up with. It feels like every generation has their Bond. So that's yeah. So have you gone back and have you seen all of them up to this point? Because to be honest, I've seen all the Craigs, most of the Brosnans, and then like sporadic ones from before that. Have you really gone back and delved into the Bond library? I mean, we're talking about the 23rd in the proper franchise in this episode, so there's quite a few.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I started rewatching the Daniel Craig ones after they hired Cary Fukunaga to do Bond 25. I was really, really intrigued with where the franchise was going because I thought it was a crazy choice. There's a ton of drama about producing the new Bond movie. It's been a very rocky road to production. And, I like to get into all that how it's made stuff with the movie industry. So, like, believe it or not, the kind of rocky road to production piqued my interest in the franchise. Like, what is this franchise trying to accomplish? And what has the Craig era done? And then after I rewatched all the Daniel Craig movies, I'm like, I really need to go back and rewatch every movie just to say I've done it, but also to like see the ones I haven't and really fully be able to understand quintessentially what Bond is, at least from the movies. I mean, I need to read the books too, but I'm going to start with the movies because there's plenty to do there already. And so I guess I'm like 6 or 7 movies into the Connery era. Man, what was the one it wasn't Thunderball. I've completely forgotten the name of the last one. You Only Live Twice, I think it was. You Only Die. No, yeah, You Only Live Twice. I think it was the last one I watched. It's so funny to see all the the sexist and racist, outdated humor. God, yeah. And maybe not funny, but it's just like you're just like, wow, I can't believe they did that. But if you're able to kind of overlook or forgive or cringe through those moments, like there's actually some really great storytelling and character stuff that's just so much fun, and it's timeless because I'm still enjoying it 5 decades later.
Yeah, talk about an opportunity to do like a cultural analysis of one property over the decades. I mean, it's short of a mythical character like King Arthur or Robin Hood or something like that. Like this character has literally been around for, what is it, 57 years now since on film. I mean,
Dr. No was 62, 1962, I think. Yeah.
So to go back and kind of chart that character's evolution, that would be a great experience. Like I would love to do that too. I tried at one point. I don't know if it was when this film came out. It might have been because Skyfall came out on the 50th anniversary of the franchise, the film franchise starting out. So that might have been when I went back and tried to watch some of the other ones, and then I like lost track because there's just so many. Which is why I've seen Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and still not Goldfinger, which I know is considered like one of the best ones.
Yeah. Oh, because I've actually haven't been enjoying all the old. But I've enjoyed the ones I've really enjoyed, but there are also like some real duds. Like I finished the movie and I'm like, even the redeeming factors weren't enough for me to give a thumbs up as a whole. But like the ones I do enjoy, I really enjoy, like a Goldfinger or Thunderball. I mean, they're just so good. And it's like something like I could watch again the next week if I had to. So there's kind of a polarity with the franchise. Even with the Craig era, there's a polarity. I mean, Casino Royale and Skyfall are 2 of my absolute favorite Bond movies ever, and just some of my favorite action adventure leading man movies. And then Spectre and Quantum of Solace are some of my least favorite Bond movies, and just extremely frustrating to watch. So it's the franchise is also kind of, I feel like it's known for its hit and miss. And so it's kind of like you feel like you're playing Russian roulette every time you walk into a theater for a new Bond. You're like, how's this going to turn out?
Right. Well, no, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to ask like where you stand on the Craig films itself. It does seem like we're alternating great film, kind of a slog, and so if that's the case, then 25 should be hopefully a satisfying end to Craig's run, who obviously has been historically like has a historic like distaste for the character. Like I don't know if that's negotiating tactics.
You mean like
Craig has said like, oh,
his attitude?
Yeah. I don't know if that's like how much of that is him just because it's an arduous, like they're really hard to make, or if it's just some kind of, maybe it's a little bit of a negotiating tactic. Like, I don't know if I want to come back. And they're like, we'll give you more money. It's like, okay, you talk me into it. It might be a little bit of both. But no,
I think it's possible, but he also like he does the character so well. Yeah. I don't feel like he's sleepwalking. I mean, maybe in Spectre he was put in a little bit of a subpar performance, but as a whole, like he is almost solely responsible for the reinvigoration of Bond due to his performance and his ethos, and he actually has quite a bit of creative say in the Bond movies now. So yeah, again, love-hate relationship, hit or miss. That's kind of like the polarity of James Bond.
Yeah, and it's funny that Spectre also was directed by Sam Mendes. So I guess this is kind of a, I think it kind of proves the rule that maybe they should keep it with kind of the Mission Impossible approach, where every film a different director, because it seems like Mendes maybe lost interest or got, I don't know exactly what went wrong there. It's kind of a different conversation, but I don't know how you botch Christoph Waltz as spoilers, I guess, Blofeld.
Yeah,
which they did the whole mystery box thing, like Star Trek Into Darkness and things like that, denying that he was Blofeld the whole time. So now we're talking about the sequel to the film we're supposed to be talking about, but right. I think Spectre in a lot of ways is an equally interesting conversation, because that should have been like the crowning achievement after Skyfall hit $1 billion and it's, the highest grossing in the franchise and all that. And instead they'd like set up for the perfect shot and then like airballed it completely. Not at the box
on
office,
paper.
But,
I mean, the core idea of Spectre, again, jumping ahead, the core idea of Spectre wasn't the worst thing in the world. It was actually could have been cool, but like one critic I listened to, Movie Bob, pointed out, like in the past 3 movies, they did none of the groundwork that something like the MCU would do to pull off such a big reveal or culmination. So it's like, it almost feels like an afterthought that, oh, by the way, it's always been me and I'm the author of your pain. Like without understanding that Bond was working his way up to catch the big fish. Like, for example, in Casino Royale, I remember this moment when the MI6 first discovers Le Chiffre, who's played by Mads Mikkelsen, who's like this terrorist, very, very financially rich guy behind the curtain. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on exactly how he factored in his character, but the idea was that M said, how could he be so rich and powerful and we didn't know he exists? Like, it was the part of the theme of this movie was like, how could he have been a sight unseen for so long? But he was just the lowest in the chain of 4 different villains up to Blofeld. Like, you can't say, oh, how could we possibly have never discovered the underling and then work your way up to someone who's literally puppeteering the global economy and the Illuminati in the truest sense of the word. And how are you surprised by that? How is it such a big intelligence failure? None of that was really planted. So it almost feels like diabolically childish to throw something like that. And that's part of the reason why I think it didn't land. But also, it was poorly executed. Just even the script itself was poorly paced and poorly executed. So it was, I think it would be actually something that would be interesting to break down at length for a full discussion, because like, all due respect to the people involved who are immensely talented, it was a really, really, really poor outcome for that amount of money and that amount of creativity in a movie.
Yeah. I remember being really hyped for that after Skyfall. And it's weird because Casino Royale reinvigorated the character in such a huge way, and then Quantum of Solace picks up literally from like a few minutes later after Casino Royale. So those two are obvious companion pieces, but then Skyfall feels almost kind of disconnected from those other two, and then Spectre, the sequel to Skyfall, kind of tries to loop all of them back together. Obviously has a lot in common with Skyfall itself because it's the same director and all that, but then picks up the plot threads from Quantum of Solace and Casino Royale more so in a way. So I think that's probably part of the reason maybe that Skyfall, it's weird because this Craig era feels like it's constantly at odds with itself about wanting to do episodic adventures, standalones, and wanting to be serialized storytelling. And so the first two are more serialized, and then Skyfall feels like it's connected to those, but also almost kind of the Dark Knight Returns in a way for Bond, where she's like, oh, we've both been at this a while and things like that. Now we're getting, this is still big picture stuff. Then we'll get into the actual movie. And then Spectre is then trying to like back to serialize. So I think that's like, I think maybe that's part of the other part of the thing with Spectre is that they've been flip-flopping us back and forth. Like the first two were a two-part story in a way. And then Skyfall started something new, and then Spectre just reverted back. So it's weird.
Skyfall.
That's why I'm so interested to see what happens next from them.
I agree, because Skyfall is almost like a sidestep, but not in a bad way at all. A very needed sidestep, because I feel like after Quantum of Solace, they're like, if we do another bad movie, we're screwed. Like we can't, it's like if we try to go down this route and it's still not landing or not interesting, if you're trying to make a third part of a trilogy, maybe we need to pass it off to someone like Sam Mendes, who was a very unexpected choice at the time. And who it was almost like a soft reboot of the Craig era,
right.
Which worked very well. Just getting into that, I think the story of how this movie came to be is interesting because it got delayed because of MGM's bankruptcy in 2009, 2010. Usually I think they were trying to schedule Bond movies like 2, maybe 3 years apart. This ended up being 4 years apart from Quantum of Solace, and that was largely due to the studio being underwater. And in that time, they were looking for a director, and I was reading here on Wikipedia that Craig had worked with Mendes before, I think on Road to Perdition, which is like early mid 2000s. Yeah. And he approached Mendes, who was directing a play, and said, would you like to do the next Bond movie? And Sam Mendes was like, he kind of had a more conventional view of Bond. He's like, I don't think that interests me. But what happens was they gave him more autonomy over the story and the characters. And if you look at Mendes' body of work, he's an amazing character storyteller. And he's such a crazy choice for this because he doesn't have any action on his resume. It's all character drama, very conventional, very classical character drama. So it's a strange pairing, but he was able to pull off the visual visual ambition of the movie of Skyfall while not losing track of the characters. And what he does, instead of trying to just synthetically develop these characters and make them so complex, he focuses on very, very simple character interactions, but that go a long way. It's like everyone has their arc. It doesn't have to be complicated, but everyone has a personality. It's like women aren't just objects. They're more like characters in this. You see what I'm saying? And so like the story with M and Bond and them both struggling to find their place in the intelligence community, it's very simple. It's not super nuanced drama, but it's so well paced and so well executed that you can't help feeling the love for the storytelling and being absorbed into the narrative.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I think before we really get any deeper into Skyfall, we should just listen to a little bit of the trailer for Skyfall right now.
What do you say about a man like that?
3 months ago, you lost the drive containing the identity of every agent embedded in terrorist organizations across the globe.
007 reporting for duty.
Where the hell have you been?
Enjoying death.
I only have one question.
Why not stay dead? There's no shame in saying you've lost a step.
They weren't targeting her. They wanted her to see it.
Welcome to the new MI6.
I'm your quartermaster. You must be joking.
Author PPKS 9mm short. It's been coded to your palm print, so only you can fire it. Less of a random killing machine, more of a personal statement.
Q.
007.
I want to meet your employer.
How much do you know about fear?
All there is.
Oh, not like this. Not like him.
Just look at you. Chasing spies. England. MI6. She sent you after me knowing you're not ready, knowing you would likely die. Mommy was very bad. The two survivors. This is what she made us. Everybody needs a hobby. So what's yours? Resurrection.
That was a little bit of the trailer for Skyfall, directed by Sam Mendes from 2012. So one thing that you mentioned a few minutes ago is that you said you kind of referenced this as the third part in a trilogy. So that was one of the key questions that I wanted to get at. Do you feel like this film, Mendes, maybe part of his pitch was this being the end of a 3-part story that essentially ends with classic Bond? Because we get Moneypenny, we get Q, we get the Aston Martin, we get what was the other thing I wanted to say? Oh man, I had another thought.
The PPK or the radio transmitter, the little...
Yeah, I mean, it circles back around to a male M, which is how the franchise started. Like a lot of that, it feels like all of it kind of leads back into like almost if you wanted to view these 3 movies as a prequel trilogy to like Dr. No or whatever, you almost could do that. Do you think that was part of his pitch?
Right. I might have misspoke earlier or was not clear about my point or just talked too fast, which is a common problem of mine. I would say like I thought this third movie could have gone more in the direction of trying to tie up the trilogy and instead was like was trying to do something else. I mean, to your point, it probably could be viewed as the third movie in a trilogy, but like usually between the second and third movie, you're planting a final conflict. You know, the end of a second movie in a trilogy is setting up the act 3 of a trilogy. And instead, Quantum of Solace kind of sputters out with a half satisfying ending, fulfilling Bond's revenge quest. And then Skyfall just jumps to a totally different conflict, totally different themes, totally different issue. It's not as much about Vesper anymore or about the Solace or whatever the enemy agency was. And that's, I don't know whether that decision was good or not, but like I know that this individual movie, apart from what came before or after, it works very, very well. And I mean, the end is like, I just walk out with a shit-eating grin, almost like I do at the end of The Force Awakens, where it's like, oh my God, I cannot wait for what's going to come next. Because the last few minutes of the movie really set up that kind of just like classy, swashbuckling vibe that has been lacking in the Daniel Craig era, which is fine, but it almost is like Daniel Craig's starting to follow more closely in the predecessor's footsteps instead of being more like a Jason Bourne type figure like he was in Casino Royale.
I also feel like with the way this ends, with everybody sort of like the classic Bond characters all in place, with him, you know, M asks him, are you ready to get back to work? He's like, with pleasure. It almost feels like the closing of like his self-doubt, his issues with Vesper, with M, like all his like baggage, literally his family home burns to the ground, actually burns to the ground and explodes actually in this film. So it feels like that has been left behind, which is why when the Spectre like reopens it again, it's like, oh, remember Quantum and Vesper? It feels like, and this is the issue I have with Dark Phoenix, which just came out as of this recording, and it's failing miserably. That it feels sort of like the fourth part of a 3-part story. It's like you ended that story and now you're like, wait, there's more. And I think that might also be some of the, you know, expectation setting that went into Spectre was, okay, now we're going to see Daniel Craig's version, not as so much of the tortured Bond, but more of the like more of the classic Bond image. You know what I mean? And that we built up to that.
At the same time, it's like, as soon as he meets Lea Seydoux' character, she's like, don't you get tired of all the running? Basically, don't you just want to retire, daddy? Like, that's basically the vibe I get. I'm like, oh my God. Because it's like, again, like Skyfall was setting up, I feel like at least a couple standalone adventures or something that was going to be more old school. And then, you know, Bond, like you said, Bond spends Skyfall getting over his age or irrelevancy only to immediately question again the next morning while chasing down this impossibly well-connected big bad from his past. I told Jackson, my roommate, my Screen Fever partner, that like I was so excited at the end of Skyfall, and then Spectre happened. Like that's all I can say. And Spectre happened. Like there's no, it just everything about Spectre feels like it contradicts Skyfall, which is weird because you would think switching, you would think keeping the same director for those two movies would ensure a degree of consistency. Yet I feel like anywhere but the way they went would have been better. I feel like if someone else came in, they would have built up a better sequel to Skyfall specifically than Sam Mendes could have. So that was just, it was confusing. I feel very confused about the experience still.
It's almost like it would be easy to imagine this and acting as more of the final part of a trilogy had Silva been revealed to maybe be behind Quantum or something, and then kind of tie it back around and have at least this be a 3-part story. Bond has moved on from a certain point, and then Blofeld, what's happening, and have Spectre start a new ongoing mini arc or whatever, and have that be the case.
That's a great idea.
It's
because they would have provided finale for the character if he really felt like he got revenge or justice for Vesper and everything that's happened in the past 2 movies. The end landed great. He'd hear where it's like, I look forward to our time together, Miss Moneypenny. That kind of like, he's like happy to show up to work, which he's been so brooding throughout his tenure so far that it's a welcome change. But yeah, then again, it's like, oh wait, it's a quadrilogy. How do you say trilogy with 4?
Yeah, quadrilogy. And thanks to the Alien
quadrilogy.
Franchise.
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost. I wonder if they brought Mendes in and they're like, here, Quantum of Solace was a mess. Do whatever you want with Skyfall, go for it. And then after Skyfall, they were like, great, Skyfall's a huge hit. Awesome. Now, this is what we want you to do for the next one. And he's like, yeah, I guess this isn't what I signed. Like, it feels to me a little bit, it reminds me of Sam Raimi, how he did the first 2 Spider-Mans, and they were all great. And then the third one, then Avi Arad and the producers were all like, okay, Sandman, that's fine, cool. But also make sure you put Venom in there because he's a huge deal, and we all know how that went. And it sounds like they're trying to do that again with the current Spider-Man franchise. So studios just keep not learning their lessons. So do you think that maybe that was part of it, kind of the producers' interference and trying to force Blofeld in there and I guess reverse engineer a cinematic Bond cinematic universe on all the films?
The leaked emails from the Sony hack shed some light on the situation. I think they were scrambling with different versions of the story and couldn't pick what they wanted until the last minute. And I think they changed the script very, very close to production. I think the script was also rushed either way. The shoot was extremely expensive. Like, it was $300 million or something. It's one of the most expensive movies ever made. I don't know where that money went, but because Skyfall looks like the more ambitious, more expensive movie, but it did. And so that's, I think filmmaking is a very complicated art. Like, anytime a movie comes out that people don't like, there's an inclination to say, yeah, I guess they didn't try. It's like, no, if you finished a movie, you had to try hard. Like, if there is a complete film that you shot all of it and edited all of it, that's already an accomplishment just getting to the finish line. And sometimes it just does not come together. And oftentimes with Bond, they shoot very close to the release date. Like, they'll shoot like the spring of the year it's coming out in the fall. I don't know why. And so it's like there's not much time for reshoots or whatever else. And when October, November comes around, you turn on the final copy of the movie, and that's that. And sometimes even the best people will screw up. And so that's pretty. I mean, that's kind of my theory on it. I think it was well intentioned. I still think actually Sam Mendes had a lot of control on Spectre. Like, I do think the film is. Showcase, it's like an auteur, but an auteur failing. It's not like his authorship was compromised. Right. It's just like his authorship had a stroke. I mean, it's terrible for me to say, but that's really what it felt like.
Something went terribly
anyway,
awry.
Sorry, we should get back to Skyfall. I'm terrible. I'm not trying to defame Spectre or Sam Mendes. I mean, Sam Mendes, I think, is one of the best directors out there. I mean, he's done American Beauty, which is one of my favorite movies. He's Road to Perdition. I think he did Away We Go. What's the other one with Leo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet? Revolutionary. Yeah, he did that one, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that was him. Yeah. I mean, it's just incredible. He's directed some highly acclaimed plays. I mean, he's amazing, and it hurts. It actually, like, as a fan, it hurts to see something fail like this. With Spectre, but the success of Skyfall remains untouched. I mean, I think that's one of the best movies I've seen so far with Bond.
Yeah, I think that I agree with that, and I think part of why this story is so interesting is one, well, they reintroduced Bond with Casino Royale, with Martin Campbell coming back from GoldenEye to do that, and cast Daniel Craig, who has this, like, much kind of darker energy than the other Bonds. So they basically reinvented the character for the age of Bourne and the age of the Nolan Batman franchise. There's a lot in this film specifically that feels kind of influenced by The Dark Knight, like especially with Silva and his plans, and we'll get into all of that shortly, I'm sure. But this movie takes that like brooding Bond And I guess it feels like there's a huge gap of time between Quantum of Solace and this in a way, because all of a sudden, like, he was this like young agent coming up, getting 00 status in the opening credits of Casino Royale. Here, they're like, oh, we've been in this too long. So he's like, almost, he's on the verge of retiring and almost doesn't come back to MI6. So he's still got that grittiness, which I know is now like a cliche term, but he also more vulnerable physically and everything in this film, which I think is a neat little bit of stake setting up front, where before he even goes on the mission with Silva, she lies about his test results. He's like physically, not able to go back into active status. He's like got all these substance abuse issues and things like that. So it's like it deftly, in one fell swoop in the first act, takes him from being this unstoppable super spy to having him almost dead and basically, like, literally the most vulnerable that we've ever seen James Bond up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, we basically see him dead floating down the river within the first 15 minutes. And so that's that part still trips me out. I think it's brilliant in some ways, but it was such a shock to watch at first. Because then you think, I mean, usually after the cold open or whatever the first 10 or 15 minutes of a Bond usually is, there's some kind of success or proficiency that we see Bond display, which leads us into the main story. Now, like you said, it's basically, it's not even like Sean Bean dying. It's one step above that. It's James Bond dying. And I think it's something that's gained through rewatches, but you see in the few scenes that Bond is kind of in retirement in some exotic setting, like, once you really think about what he's been through and what the movies have laid, you start to sympathize with where he's at, where it's like, on one hand, it's like, what is my purpose? Who am I? I'm in my 40s and I'm now basically in exile, probably with a lot of resources, but an exile nonetheless. But then like I don't, intelligence and espionage is what I am. Without that, like, I'm purposeless. And there's kind of like a desire to go back to it, but also a kind of cynical wisdom that's like, no, your time has expired. So that's why when he sees, diving into the plot a little bit, he sees an attack on MI6 where Silva blows up, triggers a gas leak and blows up a floor of the building. He to quote the script, he said, we're under attack, and he knows that he has to come back. And it's kind of like a very classical call to action, but you already know, again, simple but effective character work. You already know that, like, he's very unsure of himself and he's not up to par. He's not the kind of like flawless, infallible James Bond that we're often used to. And that's just, it's more intriguing, and there's a rich drama that comes with that.
I also think, too, that part of what maybe carried this film to the box office heights that it did, especially after Quantum of Solace, I feel like Quantum of Solace really was riding the coattails of Casino Royale, but this was the Bond franchise, basically the meta-narrative of the Bond franchise justifying why it exists in an age with Bourne movies and Mission Impossible movies and all these superhero movies. Like, well, why do we need James Bond? This is basically, you can read that into all the scenes and the hearing where M is defending MI6. So the film franchise in this film is rationalizing why this film franchise still has a place in the world of cinema 50 years on. And I think that it's trying to reaffirm its niche in the same way that Bond is, in the same way that Bond is trying to do so.
That's actually an interesting theory. I wouldn't have thought of that myself.
Because
it's good.
So much of it is old-fashioned techniques versus tech, and the fact that the villain is a cyber terrorist, the fact that Moneypenny and I think it might be I think it's
Gareth Mallory or something.
Yeah, Mallory. Yeah. They both say
old
ways are sometimes the best, and there's like that clashing of the old way of doing things, the old, way of espionage, but also spy movies in a way. And in a modern context, it's like, well, where do they fit in? And I think that the fact that Skyfall performed so well is, a resounding answer to that, of how you can make Bond still palatable for a modern audience, rather than, kind of a bit of nostalgia and kind of bring him into where we are currently with franchise filmmaking and everything else going on.
Yeah, there's a great scene where Bond's stocking up with Q right before he goes to, I think it was Shanghai. And so he's told to meet Q at a museum, and this young 20-something guy approaches him who, Bond seems irritated. He's like, I have to meet someone. I'm going to leave. And then he finds out it's Q. He's like, you got to be joking. He's like, you still have spots, he says to him. And it's like, and that was a really funny interplay where Bond is kind of realizing that things have changed, but also when he gets his package, his agent package, is literally just the Walter PPK with like dermal sensors, so only he can fire it, and then a basic, one button radio transmitter. And then so cute. One of my favorite lines in the movie is Bond says, it's not exactly Christmas, is it? And then Q says, were you expecting an exploding pen? Because we don't really go in for that anymore. And I was like, a very, very, very meta way of even referencing specifically GoldenEye, because that exploding pen is very key in GoldenEye. But also to say, like, come on, like, we're not going to play with gadgets in the same way we used to anymore. It's kind of like, and to your point, a very clear declaration of where the franchise is going and what this movie is trying to position Bond as becoming in the new era.
In a way, I think the radio is kind of emblematic of the whole movie, because the new Q, played by Ben Whishaw, which was, I think, my first exposure to him as an actor, because I know this and Cloud Atlas came out the same year, and he was great in that as well. Now he's, of course, the voice of Paddington. He was in Mary Poppins Returns. Like, his career has really blossomed in the last few years, and he's great in this film as well. The radio is given to him by Ben Whishaw, and then he kind of remarks about it. Then later on, it's a radio that really helps him kind of take down Silva. The radio comes back in later on and tracks, at least helps him capture him in like the midpoint of the movie, where he's like, oh, it's called a radio or whatever. Bond, being the old-fashioned spy, kind of literally in the course of the film, modernizing his tactics, and just as this film kind of re-energizes the franchise, it's like there's a real, like, and that's even from the first time I watched the film, I really found that meta narrative very, like, fascinating about the way that a Bond movie is kind of being so bold as to comment on itself.
Well, there's another great moment where at the end of the movie where they've basically gone back to James Bond's childhood home to make a final stand against Silva, and they don't have many weapons, and Kincaid, who's the groundkeeper, is presenting what few weapons they haven't sold to a collector from the stash, and so he's walking through, and then finally he says, but sometimes the old way of doing things is best, and he takes out a giant, like, a combat knife, essentially, and plops it down the table, and that's the knife that Bond uses to kill Silva in the end.
Right.
He doesn't use something complicated; he just throws a knife into his back, and that kills him. So it's I actually didn't put two and two together in that case, but that's yet another moment, even in the climax, of how you bring the villain down as a knife, and this is this technologically advanced cyber terrorist. So I think that's Mendes' strength with theme. Again, it's like simple but poignant, effective, has something to say.
Yeah, this film is so thematically rich. I mean, with that, and then we'll get more into the kind of disturbed father or mother-son relationship between M and Silva and Bond, and like that connection between the three of them. I also want to make sure to mention that they almost got Sean Connery for that Albert Finney role.
I know.
Which would have been really interesting. I mean, it would have kind of led to a little bit of credence to the fact that, what is that fan theory that James Bond is just a code name that's just passed from person to person? It's like that maybe.
Well, that would explain why M. That would explain why M is. Yeah. I mean, I guess, but the fact is, Bond's parents go by Bond, and you see it on their tombstone. Exactly. So it's like that's kind of it's a great theory. I would love it. I would actually be totally okay with it being true, but unfortunately, it's kind of, this movie makes it hard to believe that.
Yeah, I think so. Judi Dench, would you agree this is probably her best performance in the series? I think it's definitely the largest role she's had.
I haven't seen, or at least recently seen,
I think she was
many of her. Yeah. Well, she started in GoldenEye, but was she there for all of Brosnan's tenure? Because those movies I'm very rusty on. I haven't gotten there yet.
I believe so. I think she was there from GoldenEye all the way through to Skyfall, because this film, I guess, because they knew it was going to be her last one. Essentially, she's really as pivotal a figure in this film as Bond, pretty much. Like, she is the whole film, the whole plot centers on M, and the parallels between her Bond and Silva.
Yeah, it was almost more of her story than Bond's in some way. I mean, even though she has less screen time, I guess like in intelligence or in espionage, if you're there for a long time, there's no way you haven't made mortal enemies, at least if you've done your job well. And it's like, I think for people who play the game that long, there is a reckoning at some point and of your making, whether you did it maliciously or did it out of duty. Like, I mean, when M explains why she betrayed Silva when he was an MI6 agent, it makes sense. And it's something that you could even support the decision of as an audience member, but it's, it's still live by the sword, die by the sword. And that's interesting, especially because Bond's thinking, kind of questioning his own place. And he sees someone who's literally almost double his age and thinking, do I want to turn into that? Do I actually trust M? Do I want to be as cold and heartless as her? Bond and M have a lot of tension. I think he's never quite over the fact that she said, take the bloody shot, which, putting his life in the line. He says to M, you should have trusted me to finish the job. So that's kind of another theme of age and the physical age and morals or morality and identity within the world of espionage, which I'm such a whore for espionage stories, like whether it's Homeland or 24 or James Bond or even like Argo, which is like politically or geopolitically themed dramas and thrillers. I love that. I think the people who operate in the shadows, that's yet another theme in this movie. They always talk about the shadows. They say, does it exist anymore? Where do our enemies operate? And to me, it's just, I find it so interesting that people or agencies dedicate their lives to exploring and manipulating the shadows. Like, it's kind of like the shadows are integrated with our everyday world. There's stuff happening down the street that could inform national security issues or wars or whatever, and we'll never know about it. But these people like CIA or MI6 operate there. And it's like the adventure or the knowledge that you have and what you have to do to gain intelligence or to gain the upper hand, like it's the ultimate sacrifice, and it is a completely it's all-consuming lifestyle. I think and that's interests me to see what it does to people who operate in that all-consuming world.
There's a lot in this film about the sense of history and past trauma. I mean, Silva even says, think on your sins repeatedly to M throughout. And there's a lot of the weight of the responsibility of that. And the film really positions Bond and Silva as kind of two sides of the same coin. The last two surviving rats. And I think that's part of what makes in a lot of cases, and this is probably part of why the film feels so Batman and the Joker or so comic booky to me, is that the hero and the villain, have basically the same backstory. It's just they made different, or Harry and Voldemort. Like you can trace that throughout any different classic story of good and evil. It's based on the decisions and the choices that they make that defines who they are and all of that. And M even says in this film that he comes from the same place as Bond, the shadows, like you were saying.
Yeah, one of my other favorite beats. Yeah, it's so good. I
think that's part of what makes Silva in this film such a memorable Bond villain, which is weird in a way because Blofeld is the iconic, like his arch nemesis, and I feel like he makes Silva, it makes so much more of an impression than Blofeld because of that dichotomy between him and Bond.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I think part of the issue with, just quickly, I'm going to stay on Skyfall, I promise. But with Blofeld is that you can't perfectly recreate something that was already kind of memorable in culture, in the cultural lexicon. And so it's like with Silva, it's like they weren't trying to be Blofeld. He wasn't even a minion to Blofeld. He was just his own character. And yeah, he wasn't positioned to have a recurring arc throughout movies. It was just like, how can we most efficiently develop this character and intertwine them in the lives of our heroes from Bond or M or other people at MI6. And again, that was done so damn well. I think the scene where Silva has his introductory monologue, I think it's so memorable when he just comes down from the elevator and there's this long hallway that he has to walk towards.
One long
Bond,
lingering shot
past all the servers. Yeah, in that like warehouse type place, and it's like the monologue is so perfectly executed and perfectly timed and perfectly delivered. I mean, just as an act of filmmaking, it's so impressive how he literally finishes his monologue where he takes his last step to be right in front of Bond. I mean, the timing and the pacing and the delivery and the blocking, all that is just. But in the movie, it doesn't feel synthesized. It just feels like this guy is so diabolically precise. That's just his entire persona. So it fits the character, and then like kind of we already touched on it already, but the theme about the final two standing. What do you do? Do you turn on each other? Do you turn on everyone else? That was interesting because they're both proteges of M. That's another interesting thing. They both have the same teacher, the same mentor. They're kind of looking in a mirror as they fight with each other throughout the story. And I actually do think that Bond considers the fact that he is wrong. He never verbalizes it, but I think the acting and direction indicates that Silva starts to sway him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where you stand
in that scene with where he's telling the story about the rats and everything, and that.
I mean, a bit afterwards when Bond says, "Well, she never lied to me." Silva says, "All she does is lie," and Bond says, "No, she never lied to me." And Silva points out, like, you failed all your tests. She sent you here unprepared and said you were. She's whatever she has to do, whatever she thinks is best, regardless of whether she has to tell the truth or act protectively of agents. She's not, she's going to do whatever it takes to get the job done. And that's also yet again another theme that comes up whenever M's nearly forced into retirement in the beginning. She says, "I'm not going to leave with dignity. I'm going to leave when the job's done." For her, it's like the highest calling above people's lives or souls is her duty to country and MI6. And I think Bond starts to ask, is this someone who I want to continue to trust and take their authority, take orders from her unapologetically or without question? Again, so much to discuss here. And oftentimes it's communicated very subtly. It's like as Silva starts to reveal some of M's true nature through stories or through direct examples or how he agitates her, and Bond sees that, Bond, I think, is like constantly evaluating, do I really know what's going on in this situation? And am I, have I been lied to? So do I need to get out of Dodge?
And then in the end, it ends up that sense of duty and country is ultimately kind of M's legacy on Bond, where by the end of the film, he's like, I'm ready to go to work with pleasure to, defend, protect my country and all of that. And the film, I mean, we mentioned, you mentioned Silva's entrance, which is an outstanding scene, not only with the long shot of him coming down the hallway, but then he's like toying with Bond's mind. He's almost like kind of flirting with him at one point. And that gives
it's insinuated he is, he's sexually adventurous with guys as well. There's a lot of innuendos that I love that because Bond's been so masculine, but like heteromasculine. This kind of brings in, like Silva even says, he's like feeling Bond up. He's like, the training never covered this. He's like, there's a first time for everything. Then Bond just dead eyes him and goes, "What makes you think this is my first time?" Right. And I was just so again, like something part of the new era seeping into Bond, but I just loved how playful that was with the characters. I don't know, small detail, but it went a long way for me.
No, I agree. As you mentioned, and that calls to mind the whole the classic storytelling archetypes. The fact that Obi-Wan taught Vader and also Luke, and they are the arch nemesis throughout the course of the original Star Wars trilogy, and the fact that they have the same teacher here. So Silva knows what Bond is thinking. He knows he's trying to remember his training, like he said, and that he's just like toying with his mind and trying to see how he'll react, which again makes him feel very jokery to me in a way. He relishes in the chaos, which is fun because Javier Bardem, who comes into this film at the midway point, it gives him a lot of fun to really have those like serious dramatic moments, but also have instances where he really gets to ham it up with the whole, mommy was very bad and things like that. And the film presents that character in such a specific, careful way where you understand his motivations, but you still keep that mystery to him until after he's caught and he removes his jaw and all of that stuff, where you really get the layers peeled back on him.
then you realize some of his playfulness is almost like a coping mechanism for his trauma.
Right.
You know, it's like deep down he's vengeful and deeply wounded, and his, you know, playfulness or joking. I don't think he's like the Joker, but he does have a kind of sense of humor and whimsy to the way he presents himself and the way he presents his thoughts about, you know, trying to persuade Bond. And I think then you realize when you see him take out his, you know, fake jaw essentially and see what was done to him. Again, he tried to kill himself out of duty to Queen and country. You see that like this is someone is like bordering on a psychopath, but isn't necessarily a natural psychopath. It's what's been done to him. It's like I think he says at one point, it's like, she created me. And I mean, while we all have our own choices to make, i.e. not becoming maniacally, you know, not becoming a villain trying to bring down global society as we know it, you still understand that without betrayal, however justified M's betrayal was, this guy would not exist at all. And he wouldn't be hurting people like he is now. And that's very interesting to me.
In a way, I feel like it's almost stronger storytelling wise than Casino Royale in some respects, just because every character arc, every moment in this film feels like very fine tuned. Like it has a very clear point that it's trying to get across regarding the franchise, regarding the history of the character, and it's executed so perfectly. We were talking about Spectre and how that was not executed very well at all. And I feel like in this film, everything manages to really capture the essence of Bond as a character, and how, you know, these characters, when faced with trauma, you could either buckle under it like Silva, or you can persist through it the way that M did, the way that Bond chooses to do in the end.
Right. And I mean, just that now that you mentioned the end, I've been dying to talk about that. The final standoff in the church, I think, where it's Silva, M, and Bond, or at least it's Silva and M at first, and then Bond makes a surprise entrance at the end. That was like a individually brilliant scene, but also incredibly satisfying as a resolution to the themes that have been discussed. Like there's one creepy scene that's probably arguably the most Joker moment in the movie, actually, is where like he's like there's blood on his hand. He's like rubbing it all over M, and then he puts his head next to M, and then he puts his it's hard to explain the blocking, but like he basically puts his gun to both his own and M's head and says, "Free us with one bullet." Mm-hmm. Like that's his, it's like it's like he's has driven by revenge, but he also wants to be put down. He has like a death wish.
Right.
And that was just a demented and terrifying and brilliant scene. And then you see M, like, I think legitimately terrified for like the first time ever. And then Bond makes an appearance, kills him with a knife. And then as Silva's breathing his last breath, Bond goes, "Last rat standing." Yep. And that's kind of like, you see what I'm saying? It's like he chose another option where it's like he could overcome. He found a third option instead of killing each other or killing everyone else. I guess not. But you get what I'm saying. Like he blazes his own path and makes his own decisions and overcomes whatever his arc was. And then that's why I think the end of the movie is so satisfying.
Yeah, to go back, not to go back to Star Wars again, but it's really kind of a let the past die kind of theme for Bond in this film. Because, like I said, because it lines up with all the classic Bond, tropes and Moneypenny and the car and all that stuff. And like he burns his childhood home, and so he's moving forward with his life. And I think that's, again, part of, not to keep like beating the dead horse that is Spectre, but but the fact that
no problem there.
The fact that that film was also like, hey, but here's some more stuff from the old classic Bonds. It makes it feel like a betrayal of the direction that the franchise was going in.
Well, there was such, kind of like I said earlier, beautiful finality to that scene. Like you knew exactly, you kind of not just intellectually understood, but you like gutturally felt the victory. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the death of M, which we probably should discuss a little more, hurt. Like I remember being in theaters for that, and it was like a weirdly somber moment. I didn't know it was coming, and also the way it was executed was like almost like deeply unsettling or disturbing to me. And like it was I don't know what about it particularly gave me that reaction, but it actually felt like the passing of a legend. You understood who this person was and what they've contributed and what they stood for, and like them passing is like you almost felt like the life of the franchise waver. You know, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
it was kind of, how do you kill a legend of 20 years of this franchise and not have it change the story? Like, that's such a loss, and it is recognized, thankfully, in the film. But like, it's a deeply painful loss.
It's the end of an era for Bond.
Yeah.
The fact that Judi Dench's time as M was winding to a close in this film, and I think they wisely, you know, obviously really emphasize her character in here, and we learn more about her life in this film than we have in her previous 6 performances, because she usually just shows up, gives him a mission, and pieces out, like butts heads with him accordingly throughout, obviously. But in this film, you learn more about the connection between her and Bond, and her history, and the tough choices that she's made, and the fact that the leader of MI6 has to really bear the brunt of those decisions, and the effect that that's had on her personally.
Yeah. I think my other favorite part or one of the parts of that scene I really respected is, like, she basically dies in Bond's arms, and she looks up and says, "At least I got one thing right." And that's kind of, I think, the validation in a weird ways Bond needed to go on. He had to overcome basically fighting his own reflection, which is Silva, right. Someone who's exactly like him. And I think secretly, just like being an orphan, and going through that traumatic childhood, earlier on it says Bond is a pathological rejection of authority due to unresolved childhood trauma. So to have a maternal figure on her deathbed say, "I got something right," that's kind of like, it's not even touched upon much in the movie, but I think it could be argued that that's very, very important for Bond to have the self-assured nature to continue what he's doing and to go on the path that he does. So again, great character work. I love it so much. I
think that's why Skyfall is probably certainly of the Craig Bonds, but it's probably might be the most transcendent, because it works as just an escapist thrill ride, because of that's the big scope.
The set pieces.
Yeah. The scope of these films, and this one specifically, but also that all that character work and all that theme and everything is in there. It's just below the surface. Maybe you have to look a little closer, or you might miss some of that. So if you just go into this expecting a superficial Bond adventure, you'll enjoy it. But if you're looking for a little deeper storytelling, it's obviously it's in there for you. And the fact that Bardem is in this, already an Oscar winner, and made such an impression in this movie. I mean, I actually even remember, I think there was some light Oscar buzz for him at one point, because he was nominated for a SAG award for this film.
Wow.
Which is insane to me, because this is a franchise. And again, not to go back to the Joker comparison, but Heath Ledger won for posthumously for playing the Joker in The Dark Knight. And, Bardem already had an Oscar, and this is a similarly big villain performance and a much touted sequel in a long ongoing franchise. So it felt like that something like that could have been in the air. Do you think that Silva is, clearly in the Craig franchise, I'd say it's probably the case, but do you think he is among the best Bond villains? And I guess we sort of already explained why, if that's the case.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I mean, like if you think back to, I'm trying to think what are the other iconic Bond villains, like Goldfinger for sure. Man, why am I blanking? Because there's Goldfinger and Blofeld, I guess, would kind of be like two of the most seminal villains. Blofeld of which appeared in several movies. I think there was something to their character as to what they were trying to accomplish and why. And the Bond villains that fail are the ones that are kind of diabolical without cause. Like, I know people will say, "Oh, Bond is just, it's all about the girls and the cars and the locations and the action. Like, the story doesn't matter." And that could be argued, but I think the best Bond movies that are universally revered as the franchise's crowning achievements always have good story and good character work. It's just not complicated like a prestige drama. It has to be simple. And so when you have a simple and well-honed villain like Blofeld or Goldfinger, or in this case Silva, you really buy it. And I think in the case of Silva, less is more. If he appeared in a lot of movies, it's like his agenda could become tired or trite or cliche, but it's like he comes in the middle of the movie swinging hard. It's already like you don't waste a moment, and he has a journey, and no scene is wasted and no line is put in without purpose. And I think that's ultimately what contributes to why he's going to be remembered as one of the best, apart from just a brilliant performance.
Yeah, you mentioned all those hallmarks of the franchise, and that's probably because there are so many of them. That's probably part of why my interest in the Bond films has always has wavered kind of as the quality of the films have, which is why going into like Skyfall, I was like, okay, I will see how this is. Quantum of Solace wasn't great. So I'm on a downswing right now, which is like, of course I'll see Bond 25, but I'm not like over the moon, like hyped about it like I am for the next 2 Mission Impossible movies, because that franchise has been consistently stellar, like especially the last 3, and Bond has been very erratic. So one thing I wanted to touch on also, because we mentioned the final act set piece. I love the fact that it starts out, you get that big invasion of the hearing where the Silva and his men come in there, and there's a big shootout, and Mallory gets shot and all that, and then it really focuses on the 3 central characters. It's something similarly to what Captain America Civil War or something like that might do, where it's like, all right, you got your big set piece, and now we're gonna like really hone in on more of an intimate character interaction, even though there is an exploding house and all that other stuff. Certainly. How do you feel about because I've seen this, I don't know if it's honest trailers or what does a criticism about the third act of this film, where it's very Bond meets Home Alone-y, where it's just like rigging.
Yeah, no, that was the honest trailer. I think it's total horseshit. Okay. I think it's a horseshit complaint. I think the final set, I mean, I often love set pieces or third acts that tone things down instead of crank them up, not in a sense of character drama, but of scope, where it's like, Silva circling a house that's burning down with Bond inside is more exciting than a chase through the mountains. You know what I'm saying? It's something, whereas it's in middle of nowhere. It's at a extremely personal place for Bond, extremely symbolic place for Bond. He said somewhere where we'll have the upper hand, somewhere where I know. It's like throughout the story, you're seeing Bond have to confront himself, and not just through Silva, but himself in many ways thematically. Instead of shoving his history under the rug, he has to embrace himself and embrace where he's come from and embrace his trauma in a sense. I think that's so much better than any big blowout. So for me, the fact that and the other thing is he didn't have many resources. We're so used to Bond having unlimited resources, all these gadgets, a helicopter that can fit into a briefcase, for Christ's sake. Like, we have all that stuff. It's like the fact that now he has, 2 rifles, a knife, a stick of dynamite, and some screws and nails. Like, that's much more, can tell much more about a character and actually position the character to be much more of a hero because of his ability to MacGyver a way to defeating Silva and his army with nothing. So I loved it. No, I mean, that's one of my favorite parts of the movie, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting approach because it scales down the action, as you said, that in this franchise tends to get really really overblown. I'm thinking of something like Die Another Day or The World Is Not Enough, where there's like all kinds of crazy stuff happening. I think there's an invisible car or something in one of those. Or you
go to space like Moonraker. You have a zero-G battle. I love Moonraker, but still, it's like it goes so crazy at the end.
Right. And I think by amping up the personal stakes, it makes that a lot more satisfying. I just thought that was kind of a funny criticism and way of looking at it. I'm like, I mean, yeah, kind of. It kind of is. It still works, but I could see their point in that, in kind of pointing out that for comical effect. But we didn't even mention the opening credit sequence or the theme song by Adele or any of that yet. So it obviously just won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. I think it also won like sound editing or something. So how do you feel? Where do you feel that this credit sequence ranks with some of the other previous Bonds? And I guess the first Oscar win for the iconic Bond theme.
It's the best. Just plain and simple. It's the best. There's no topping it. There might never be. The song is amazing. I still listen to it all the time. The way they weave in, I mean, they often weave in parts of the story into the credits, but the way specifically it's done here. When I saw it in theaters, it just was transcendent. Like I was in a trance, and I think what's great about it is not only is it independently evocative and striking, it's that compared to what you've seen and what you're about to see, it further it invokes some kind of emotional reaction that you're not even sure why, but it's like, that's what Bond is feeling. Do you know what I'm saying? It's somehow the credit sequence and the song and the visual design bridges the gap between the audience in their seat and the characters on screen, apart from just being wildly entertaining and a complete extravaganza of creativity and design. I could gush about it for much longer, but I think where I stand on it now. It's hands down my favorite sequence in the franchise so far.
Well, the iconography in that sequence, I think, is such a cool way to encapsulate the whole thing, and it's so dreamlike, and it's introed with Bond.
Yes.
Bond's like basically floating to his death, which you could almost sort of look at that like this is Bond's fever dream as he's like having this near death experience kind of thing. And the song was so powerful and impactful that Sam Smith won an Oscar for the next movie's song, which is way inferior to this one in pretty much every way. That like momentum carried on for the next Bond film, which was funny because this was the first one to ever win an Oscar. Other ones had been nominated before, so I think it's kind of interesting to consider that ended up being kind of the, I guess, short-lived trend. We'll see what happens with the next one.
I think, quick note, the other two ones I really like Bond themes are Live and Let Die by, I think it was Paul McCartney, and then Goldfinger. Don't remember who that was by, but that's also a classic song. So that was...
I think that's Shirley Bassey, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. Yeah, no, for sure. I've had it on repeat on Spotify, so for sure. I actually wondered, one thing I was really excited to discuss, but I feel like I should throw it to you instead of, I think people have heard enough of my thoughts by now. The Bond girls. I mean, apart from M, Moneypenny, and then Bernice Marlowe, who plays Severine.
Right.
She's in it as well. I'm curious as to those characters.
Well, it's watching these. You can tell one of the ways that they modernized the franchise is that Bond's sexual conquests aren't as rampant as they might have been in the 60s. So in this movie, he has, he has kind of a brief love scene with the lady, the woman that he's on that island drinking glasses with Scorpion. Well, no, not that. Before that, when he's in his exile and he's drinking shots of liquor with a scorpion on his hand. Really briefly. Yeah. So he has like a brief affair when he's before he returns, and then Severine. Like there's usually like now. He beds two women per movie, kind of. I think is where we are at with these more recent ones, and which obviously makes sense. So I do think that the part with Severine, like I think that actress delivers a really good performance, but there are some ways to read that character in the film, sort of. Throwing some sketchiness towards in Bond's way. One, because he spots her there and he's like, "Oh, you were in this, you were a sex worker. I think I'm going to show up later on your boat and sneak up on you with my dick out and see what happens while you're in the shower." Right. And then later on, I think Bond maybe cares a little more about these women, at least some degree, than he lets on. But it's also like very throwaway where it sounds like he's just like using these women. And I think that was one criticism that I've seen of this movie specifically. There's actually Pete Holmes did a really funny sketch for, I think, College Humor about that scene where he gets in the shower and he obviously doesn't have protection or anything, and initiates, hooking up with her in the middle of the shower. So I think that the way that they handle it here is not great. Better than they used to, but it's an evolution. So in the next one, he gets with Léa Seydoux, and I'm really interested in Monica Bellucci, I think, too, in the Spectre. Very early on. I'm curious to see now with Bond 25 in the Me Too era and things like that, how they're going to still let him, be sexually adventurous and all that, but not let it kind of rein it in so it's more considerate towards the women and the characters on screen.
My interpretation of the scene with Severine was a little bit different, actually. I mean, because first off, she invites him to the boat. True. I mean, like, let's just be clear, like, early on, like watching the old Bond movies, there are scenes that are like downright rape. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. I think it's not in Dr. No. Goldfinger, with Pussy Galore. Like, there's literally a scene where like maybe it's a different movie. No. Yeah, no, it is with Goldfinger, and like they're in a barn discussing, and he just like starts making out with her, and no joke, like knocks her down and like pins her hands to the ground and starts like kissing her without any kind of a permission, or like literally just out of nowhere, like pins her down and starts kissing her until she like gets into it, and then he takes off her clothes. I was like, that's rape. I just watched a rape scene. With this, however much indiscretion is expressed on Bond's behalf, at the same time she invites him to the yacht. She sets up like a romantic like wine champagne thing. She has her hair down, she's in her robe, she's expecting him like that. You know, it's a reasonable thing that he was watching, or he knew that he was invited. She gets into the shower, he joins him, and like there's also like verbal consent. Like he says a pickup line that she responds like suggestively. She could have said no. So it's like there's a level of indiscretion or distaste in like porking a former child prostitute that's like, come on. At the same time, it's like I completely disagree with any notion that this was not consensual or not reciprocated, and it was like that was an instance of rape, because we have seen instances that were rapey earlier. This was not one. To your point, could still be more tasteful. It could still be a little bit more, but I didn't get the controversy when it came out.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it is straight up rape. I think the way it's depicted on screen, like there are those elements that you mentioned, but it's problematic is the way I would describe it. It's not like all the way there, but it's like enough that it's like on the surface appears to feel sort of not consensual and an element. Right. So it's a gray area where I understand where you're coming from, and I don't necessarily feel that it is all the way like skeezy on Bond's part, but it is sort of like I could see how it makes people feel icky.
Yeah. Oh no, for sure. It's not a particularly tasteful scene. I will say what's interesting with Moneypenny, there's a scene where she delivers a message for him and is basically spying on Bond for Mallory before Mallory becomes M, and like she kind of it's weird to say this out loud, but she like offers to like shave him with the like it sounds so unsexy when I say it out loud.
It's a hot scene, though.
So like yeah. So it's a super hot scene, and it's like they're talking as she's using the straight razor to shave him, and then like so he's like they're discussing, and the conversation fizzles out, and he's like, okay, we'll see, and he starts to like unbutton her shirt, and then that's when she like puts the razor like right in his neck, and it's like, still got one more spot to go, don't move, I could slit your throat. And they don't hook up, and like that was, for whatever morsel it's worth, that was a nice scene where it's like, oh, Moneypenny isn't an object. Like, Moneypenny actually has a lot of poise and autonomy in this iteration, in this movie. And it's just inherently progressive, because to have an African-American woman play Moneypenny I don't know if that would have flown back in the old school Bond.
Yeah, Naomi Harris was so great in this movie.
Oh, and so good.
I think had she not been playing Moneypenny, which isn't that the whole running gag with Moneypenny, that she's like all about Bond, and Bond's like, yeah, I'm going to keep you friend zoned a little bit, and like
drag it's kind of a dick to her in the old movies. Yeah, really.
Yeah. So I had that not been Moneypenny, I have a feeling that probably would have happened. They were just establishing the early quote early days of that trope and that relationship. Yeah. But I presume we'll see more of that kind of progressive handling of female characters, where they're really owning their sexuality, or rather than her, it's doing like the woman doing the seducing. Maybe Bond will get seduced more in the next movie himself. I don't know.
He nearly got seduced by the villain, so
yeah,
almost.
So one thing that I wanted to make sure, I know we're probably getting to the wind down part of the conversation, but one thing we have to mention is that when I first saw this movie, what really struck me, other than the story and Bardem and all that, was how amazing it looks. So Roger Deakins' cinematography, I think this was, I'd heard of Roger Deakins, but this was one of those movies. This was one of those movies that when I saw it in theaters, I was like, oh, that's right. That's what Roger Deakins brings to a movie. Got it. I need to make sure I watch that now every time he shoots a movie. And of course, he ended up winning the Oscar for Blade Runner 2049, which he does amazing work in that. So tell me a little bit about what do you think his contribution is to this movie, and especially, I mean, throughout the whole film, but like I think it's most pronounced in the Shanghai sequences.
Oh my God. Yeah. Where to begin? I never really knew Bond for its like hyper stylized imagery in a way. I mean, the older movies, as fun as they are, they're visually kind of flat. And I thought Quantum of Solace was like an ugly looking movie anyways. And so it was something where when I actually chose, when my friends and I were out one weekend, there was a choice between Cloud Atlas and Bond. And we started in Cloud Atlas because I was like, oh, it's Bond. Like, I was kind of burnt from Quantum of Solace. I'm like, sure, some mediocre movie with whatever. It was because there was only 2 out so far. One was a huge hit, one was a miss. I wasn't in a rush to see Skyfall. We started in Cloud Atlas. We hated Cloud Atlas. So like 10 minutes in or 15 minutes in, we left to go to the whatever was the next Bond screening. And like I was completely blown away because I was going to Cloud Atlas to see a visual treat. I could not believe that Bond delivered in spades what I would look to like sci-fi or other blockbuster movies to give that kind of visual aesthetic. From Macau, I mean, that's just gorgeous photography with the like kind of gambling casino in Macau. And I mean, even the way London is shot, Sam Mendes had talked a lot about how he really, being a Londoner, he wanted to capture the city in a unique light visually with color and light in a way that typically had not been used to portray London, something that would kind of stylize it to or give it a flavor to the point that like it might not look photographically exactly what London looks like, but it makes you feel like what it feels like to be in London. I just thought it was really fascinating. And of course, I mean, the final scene with at Skyfall, the mansion itself and the underwater sequence. And I mean, it's unbelievable what he did in terms of light and color and aesthetic. A lot of it is overexposed, but still looks really good. I've yet to figure out exactly how he did that. I also just think the aesthetic he chose, or he and Sam Mendes chose, worked perfectly for the story. Sometimes you have a super cool looking movie that the way it's shot or the way it's lit actually kind of counteracts the way you're supposed to feel from the scene. You know what I'm saying? It's like a confused tone. Right. Sometimes it's like, even with the Marvel movies, I love the Marvel movies, but a lot of them look the same and can look sometimes kind of flat. And they're very colorful, but through light and contrast, it lacks that pizzazz, that style. I saw Deakins' work as accentuating and amplifying the way the characters felt from scene to scene. And that's that. I think just like, the title sequence brought me in, so did the visual aesthetic just locks you in your seat and you're spellbound. I mean, whether you're in London or Shanghai or fighting at night on a farm next to a burning mansion, like that's so cool.
Yeah, I feel like this is the definitive benchmark for the franchise visually, and totally. Obviously Deakins did not. I feel like this is a We Hate Spectre episode, but Deakins did not return for Spectre, which is another way in which that film failed to deliver. So, and it's insane to me like how much his contribution elevates this already strong material to the fact that it's able to stand out amongst all, because as you mentioned, the Bond films are not known for being like beautiful to look at necessarily, but there are shots in this film, and I think the moment when I was watching it the first time where it really crystallized for me was again the Shanghai scene, but he's on the boat with the floating lanterns. And then I think the part before that with the fist fight with the jellyfish behind him. And stuff. I was like,
God,
well,
that wasn't a Shanghai. Yeah, like a Shanghai high rise. Yes. They were next to like a neon, because like Shanghai is looks futuristic. Like even on the highways, they're lined with like neon lights. And that fight that was basically backlit by like this like Blade Runner like advertisement. That's another takeaway is this completely reinvigorated and altered the way I looked at the franchise and what potential I thought the franchise had, which is a massive accomplishment to something that already had 22 movies before it. Exactly. To be able to do that and infuse that kind of flavor.
Yeah. So we'll see. Hopefully with Bond 25, they'll get things back on track. I mean, if we're in every Craig Bond film alternately is a standout, then maybe we'll be set for something really special. Before I have one more question, is there anything about this film that you want to make sure we covered before we start winding down?
No, I think we've covered everything, pretty much everything. I did want to, again, just say how much I love Naomi Harris. I don't know. I feel like I might have missed the opportunity to just gush about the Moneypenny character and how well she did. I thought she mixed kind of, to your point, she was able to mix her sexuality with also poise and self-respect and sophistication, and that's not something that Bond has been known for managing it, giving its female characters to be more dynamic and multifaceted and independent. I also think like probably because of Sam Mendes, this movie is an embarrassment of riches in terms of character performances. Like, again, like the scene where Moneypenny and Bond meet up in Macau, it's not a particularly complex scene. There's not even that many zingers in it, but the actor's delivery is so honed into where the characters are and so interesting. Like, specifically Naomi Harris can read a phone book and make it sound fascinating. And that's also amplified or elevated by Sam Mendes' ability. So like another takeaway from this movie, I guess what I'll leave as my final word is that the characters and their delivery and everything about the people felt so much more real and so much more engaging and so much more intriguing. Espionage is intriguing. To have, people like Pussy Galore or Honey Rider, it's like they're fun characters, but they're completely one note. And this is still, Skyfall preserves the fun of old school Bond, but gives its characters more sophistication and respect. And for that, I just, one of the many, many reasons I love this movie so much.
Yeah, people like Moneypenny and Q actually feel like real people instead of just props, like steps on Bond's journey in this film. So just before we start ending the show, I would be remiss, we're talking about Bond. Obviously, Bond 25 is going to be, I'm assuming, the last film. It's been confirmed, the last film for Daniel Craig at this point.
Hopefully. I hate to say that, but hopefully.
So who do you think should be the next 007? Or alternatively, if you don't want to, that's a conversation that people feel like they're constantly having, even when Daniel Craig is signed in for additional films. How do you think they should approach the series going forward? Do you think they should reinvent it and start from scratch again? Do you think they should keep this cast of supporting players and just recast Bond and move forward? What would you like to see happen?
I think each Bond iteration needs a hard reboot. Man, the actor question is so hard because, for example, no one would have thought of Daniel Craig to play Bond in 2005, yet they still, whatever they shot, 2004, 2005, yet they still chose him. I've heard people, he might be a little old for this, but Idris Elba. I think Idris Elba, and it is not a matter of people might think I would say that because it's like, oh, Bond needs to be progressive. I just genuinely believe that Idris Elba is the best actor out there to play Bond. Right. Like, of all the suggestions I've heard, they're all like, but, okay, I like this element, but, I don't like this act. It's like there's so many pros and cons. With Idris Elba, I cannot think of a single con to him playing Bond. I think he would be a knockout. But again, it also depends on what creative direction they go. If they want to cast a younger Bond or they want to do something to, again, reinvigorate the franchise, picking someone in their 40s might not be the right choice. So it's entirely dependent on what the producers choose. But if we're just looking at for a more classical older Bond, oh my God, Idris Elba, please.
And at this point, that kind of almost feels like the obvious answer. But I agree with you. You'd see a lot of people that bucking the Idris Elba response, and I think part of that, I guess they get hung up on race, but then my whole thing is with Bond, it's not white, black, it's British. It needs to be a British guy.
And he's British. Idris Elba is British.
That's all you get. That's all you need. Because every once in a while you'll see people say, "Oh, people still want Idris Elba to play Bond," and there'll be a post about it on every entertainment site, and then the comments are like, "Oh, what's next? A white Shaft?" and things like that. And it's like it's not about that. It's not about race. What Bond needs to be is British, handsome, charming, and a good actor. And you got all of those with Idris Elba. He has the presence. He's got the accent. He's from, they were going to say, and it's again, it's not a race thing. If they were going to cast, I don't know, Chris Hemsworth then I might be like, well, he's Australian, so it's kind of a gray area. But, you know, if they were going to cast Chris Evans or somebody like American, then I'd be like, okay, no, that's not cool. I don't care what color your skin is. You're not, it's like, that's like casting an American as Harry Potter or something. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like,
no, I totally
so it's a
that.
nationality thing. And so I mean, Idris Elba feels like the obvious choice, but I also feel like that's because it makes sense. I mean, everybody he's famous enough now where everybody pretty much knows who he is, but he's also not somehow leading films that often. You know what I mean? So it's like a role like this would kind of propel him to that next level that he needs to get to.
He did, I think, The Dark Tower, which I don't think is a good movie, but he was the absolute standout as like the gunslinger type character. And like, obviously Bond isn't a gunslinger Western type character, but the range of both steeliness and sympathy and physicality and also performance with very little dialogue, because Bond's never been a chatty kind of guy. It's an aura, an energy, a vibe. I think Idris Elba, when you watch that or you watch any of his like action-y roles, you're like, oh my God, this guy is something really special. And I can't think of, I'm sure there's great options, but if I was a producer, he'd be at the top of my list.
Yeah, agreed. Cool. So we're the Idris Elba for Bond 26 or whatever. That's
exactly.
The Cricket Table's official
and
standpoint.
One other quick thing. I am thrilled with how Bond 25 has lined up in terms of the creative crew. Scott Z. Burns, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, both unconventional picks for Bond, not British, but Scott Z. Burns isn't, I don't think, but Phoebe Waller-Bridge is perfect oddball choices, I think. Cary Fukunaga, he's one of the most eclectic and diversified director in terms of his body of work. I mean, he did Maniac, which is a weird Netflix series. It's a complete joy. He's done Jane Eyre, Beasts of No Nation, great movies. The cinematographer they hired is the guy who did La La Land and The First Man, which are two of the most beautiful movies that have recently been shot. They've leaked some of the locations they've shot at. I mean, everything. And just even listening to Cary Fukunaga talk about what kind of energy he wants his movie to have, I'm completely on board for what they're cooking up. I mean, I was excited for Danny Boyle, and once he got fired, I was really depressed, but like they've recaptured my interest. So I'm actually very optimistic about Bond 25. And if we look at the whole polarity, bad movie, good movie, bad movie, good movie, Spectre sucked. So I think we're in for something good. I think this is going to be the good movie until Bond 26 or 27. So I'm very optimistic. And that's part of the reason I'm rewatching all of it, is because I'm so excited for Bond 25.
What about recent Oscar winner Rami Malek as the villain? Like, what do you think?
It's so good. Such a good choice, because he's not mustache twirling. He's he's a very almost like distant and cold actor, and he's just, I don't know what vibe they're going to pick with the character, but I don't know if you couldn't have picked a more interesting actor for a Bond villain. I think it's like, you don't want like John Cena as a Bond villain. You don't want someone who's, it's like you want someone who's with sophistication or a weird diabolical charm. I use that word a lot, diabolical. I think it's just a Bond thing.
Well, they did have Dave Bautista in Spectre, which again was a waste.
He's a henchman.
He's a waste of Dave Bautista, though, too. Even for that role, he didn't really have much to do there. So
kind of like Jaws. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of another throwback. So, but yeah, Skyfall, still a great movie. I'll definitely go back, and I don't know if I'll go back and rewatch Spectre or Quantum of Solace, but I'm definitely going to go see Casino Royale and maybe revisit this one again before Bond 25 to see if we can keep that if we can recapture that magic with that these two films did. So, Adam, thank you so much for coming on the Crooked Table podcast again. Do you want to let people know where they can find you on social media?
Yeah. At Adam Barnard, Bnard on Twitter. Screen Fever, at Real Screen Fever on Twitter, or Screen Fever on YouTube or Facebook. You can find our content there. I also forgot to mention earlier, because I got distracted, I also work as an editor for GateWorld.net. It's like a Stargate sci-fi news site. We do a lot of video work, interviews. We have our own basically Wikipedia for Stargate. So I work with Darren Sumner over there. You'll find me around talking or talking talking or gushing about all the things I love. And thank you again for giving me a platform to come and discuss this movie, because for whatever reason, I've revisited this and like really learned a lot from it, I feel like, and felt a lot of things, and have such a respect for this. And as my own aspiring creative entity, this has been a huge inspiration just recently. So it's an absolute honor to get to come on and talk about it for as long as you let me talk about Skyfall.
No, it's been this. There's not that many billion-dollar blockbusters that are this rich that you can actually talk about it for over an hour and feel like you barely scratched the surface. So, I think this is a good opportunity for me to revisit it and revitalize my excitement for next year's film, and kind of get back, remember what this character in this franchise can be when they nail everything perfectly as this movie does. So minus the problematic female characters, but I have a feeling they'll do better next time. Like I said, it'll be interesting. It's interesting to watch this franchise and all its tropes evolve with the times, as you've noticed going back and watching for the first time some of the older films. So.
Totally. Well, come visit Screen Fever sometime and do a Bond discussion with me. I'd absolutely love it.
Absolutely. Anytime you guys need me, I'd love to collaborate on more things. And it sounds like now you guys are going to be generating a lot more content. So definitely people should go check out your YouTube channel there. So that'll be all for the Crooked Table podcast this episode. Adam, it was a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll have you again on soon.
Absolutely. Whenever you want.
All right. Great. Thanks, man.
If you're interested in joining me on the show to chat about one of your favorite films, head on over to crookedtable.com/guest. Or you can consider supporting the show at patreon.com/crookedtable. Of course, you can always find more podcasts, reviews, videos, and other movie-related goodies over at crookedtable.com. Until next time, this has been the Crooked Table Podcast, and I've been Rob.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.